Minneapolis police are trying to hide one of the latest embarrassments across the force, a lawsuit against Minneapolis Police Chief Tim Dolan and associates for KKK-based racial threats, slurs, and demotions systemic against black police officers amongst the Minneapolis police force. The Minneapolis Police Department, renowned for its racial prejudice against blacks, houses one Robert Kroll, now renowned for having called black and Muslim Congressman Keith Ellison a terrorist, and concordantly ordains a white power badge on his vest. As seen on the website, mnpolicecorruptionarchives.blogspot.com, we see that there's been some tampering with the website. The site had depicted Minneapolis Police Chief Tim Dolan exposed, the heart of KKK scandal. Scrolling down the page, a photograph of the police chief, as seen here, with also a link to Minneapolis Communities United Against Police Brutality group, Michelle Gross, who works against the systemic bigotry within the Minneapolis police force. Now, when we go to the InsideNews.com link, what do we find? Reported attacker site. The website at InsideNews.com has been reported as an attack site and has been blocked based on your security preferences. And so going from the attacker site here, I'm going to copy the URL as it is here. And I'm going to go over to the Wayback Machine at archive.org is where I am now. And I'm going to put in the URL that I had copied into the box and go back. And we're going to see that what we find is extremely poignant. I'm here at the URL now, InsightNews.com commentary.asp mode display article ID 3658. Again, it had been removed and created as, well, it had been made an attacker site of. Now going back to the archive, January 28, 2008, what do we find? Insight News. Minneapolis Police Department uses demotions to achieve diversity. The Minneapolis Police Department is in the process of having its head handed to it on a platter. 5 veteran sergeants, officers, Sergeant Charles Adams, Lieutenant Medria Arredondo, Lieutenant Lee Edwards, Lieutenant Don Harrison, Sergeant Dennis Hamilton are suing the Minneapolis Police Department and Tim Dolan on grounds of the Minneapolis Police Department perpetrating systemic discrimination and sustaining a labor environment hostile to African Americans, and there isn't a snowball's chance of any judge throwing this out as a nuisance suit. As a victim of Minneapolis police brutality, ongoing and repeated attempts towards my murder, in association with attempts by both Minneapolis Police Chief Tim Dolan and Winnipeg Police Chief Keith McCaskill, an FBI graduate and affiliate here in Canada, all in an attempt to silence our voice without warrant and without charges. They've been doing their best to silence me. They have sent me cyber threats. They have deleted voicemail messages. They have now gone to the lengths of creating external links and converting them to attacker sites, as you've seen here.
My mother here, sitting beside me, to explain, is no stranger to this racial persecution herself, having had me as a son, and my father, grown up in a war of racial prejudice and racial hatred extremism, and currently we are suffering tremendously at the hands of bigotry and extremism coming from the Minneapolis police force, the FBI, and their affiliates and assets within FBI asset Winkley Police Chief Keith McCaskill, who are attempting our murder and kidnapping in order to silence my online voice. And as you can see here, my mother is extremely tired. She's suffering, and her health has deteriorated quite tremendously. But we are going to press on, and we're going to expose the individuals who have brought these afflictions upon us.
Ever since being on the aircraft, when the airport police realized that I was a witness, they have fabricated what occurred on the aircraft and have forced us to deal with the fallout from that on an ongoing basis. And they did so to protect themselves from assault charges for assaulting a man who simply was inquiring about his rights.
That being myself. And FBI COINTELPRO have persecuted us since, working with the Minneapolis Police Department, have put us through covert judicial persecution, all because of racial profiling, and the assaults are ongoing. They've also sent me cyber threats. Threats from FBI, referencing themselves as Agent 94934, warning me that I'm pissing people off and creating enemies and to stop what I'm doing. However, we are going to expose these individuals as they're making further attempts upon our lives, and this must be stopped.
Many African Americans can tell you stories about police stopping them simply for driving while black.
Minnesota just spent almost $2 million on a study that found those weren't just stories. David.
Systemic corruption exposed in the Minneapolis-Hennepin County judiciary, targeting blacks, victims of police brutality, and the poor. Here is the URL, charityadvantage.com, CUAP/120906, newsletter.asp, Communities United Against Police Brutality, the December 9th, 2006 email, although still very current as of today. As it reads, one of our lawyers is under attack. The community will fight back. Attorney Jill Clark has tirelessly and fearlessly defended people of color and poor people who have been targeted by the criminal justice system, especially survivors of police brutality and family members of people killed by police. She often takes important cases free of charge in order to create significant changes in police policies and practices. She is truly the people's lawyer. As part of her work, Jill has encountered and exposed courthouse corruption being used to railroad police brutality victims and others. This corruption contributes to Minnesota having the highest rate of over-prosecution of blacks in the country. And that is sourced via the Council on Crime and Justice. Now, since then, Jill Clark has been subject to judicial persecution and retaliatory measures taken against her that are baseless in effect because of her having taken this strong position in defiance of this systemic persecution, brutality, and opportunistic abuse of people who have no legal voice to speak on their own behalf.
Schechter tells us tonight the state has made no effort to address the problem.
Even though Keith Ellison is a state legislator and an accomplished trial lawyer, he still believes he's been a victim of racial profiling, pulled over just for being black.
But I've never really had enough proof, because that's one of the things about racial profiling. Nobody's going to tell you, I stopped you only because you're black and therefore.
But for more than 2 years, there has been proof. This $1.9 million state-funded study, the Minnesota Statewide Racial Profiling Report. It concludes police pull over minorities at a greater rate than whites.
I think what the study showed definitively is that we have a serious problem with racial profiling in our state. We have a serious problem with racial.
And there are some numbers that would seem to back him up on that. According to the Civilian Police Review Authority, last year 69% of complaints against the MPD were filed by African Americans, even though they account for only 18% of the population. It's just the reverse for whites, who filed 19% of complaints and represent 65% of the city's population.
The official court documents, United States District Court, District of Minnesota, 4th Division, plaintiffs, the officers listed here, Lieutenant Madria Arredondo, Donald Harris, Sergeant Dennis Hamilton, plaintiffs versus City of Minneapolis, Minneapolis Police Department, and Timothy Dolan, an individual. Defendants. It depicts very clearly every African American officer at defendant, Minneapolis, received a hate letter signed KKK through the interoffice police departmental mail. The letter threatened each African American officer's life. Section 15, a recent example of the tolerance defendants have for racially discriminatory conduct by white officers, includes without limitation comments by Lieutenant Robert Kroll in 2007 that United States Congressman Keith Ellison, who is a Muslim and black, is a terrorist.
It seems using children to create secret spy houses is no longer above them. Jordan Group in Minneapolis to create cop spy house, use kids as human shields. The Minneapolis Police Covert Operations. Communities United Against Police Brutality has obtained a document showing that a Jordan Neighborhood Homeowners Association, JACC, is making arrangements to rent the house at 1620 26th Street and turn it over to the Minneapolis Police Community Response Team, CRT, the Undercover Cops Unit, to secretly monitor their neighbors. At the same time, this neighborhood has received a $975,000 City Kids grant for life skills training and summer programs for local youth. The document indicates that they would run this youth program out of the same house as a way to obscure the presence of the undercover cops, and that the kids would provide free labor to maintain the house, do laundry, clear snow, and provide lawn care. The house would be dubbed the Community Learning Center, but it seems to us it is the cops who would do most of the learning.
The article continues, bottom line, we got information that a group was planning to use community funds for a secret police operation and intended to work with a youth program to cover those activities. We had a responsibility to expose this plan to the community, so reads Michelle Gross, Communities United Against Police Brutality. As one of our board members put it, quote, just imagine the potentially catastrophic fallout of their twisted scheme left uncovered. What they attempted to achieve would have resulted in innumerable individuals being assaulted and possibly even killed. But this is nothing new. Go back to RNC. What do we find? Minneapolis FBI Joint Task Force attacking civilians inside their home in what they refer to as preemptive home raids and strikes on people who are innocent, and Fourth and First Amendment violations of the sort, the most risible violations of constitutional rights and freedoms that we have seen in America in quite some time. But this is nothing new, and that Minneapolis police who are in collusion with FBI overtly, as evidence within the RNC, would be acting and creating this spy house and exploiting children in doing so should also come as no surprise. The FBI COINTELPRO has a noted and sordid history for targeting poorer areas which are predominantly black and black human rights and civil rights leaders such as Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Fred Hampton, all of whom they eventually assassinated. as you'll see in the following. FBI COINTELPRO in Minneapolis is a safe haven for the corruptions, racial prejudices, and persecutions that are ongoing against victims of police brutality, blacks, minorities, and the poor.
COINTELPRO stands for Counterintelligence Program, which was primarily run by the FBI as a covert action program against domestic dissidents, the use of infiltration, psychological warfare, harassment through the legal system, and the use of extralegal force and violence, including murder, probably began in the 1950s and is now a permanent feature of U.S. government. Targets included the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the anti-war movement, the environmental movement, opposition political parties, and basically any progressive group in American society.
Any black leader with charisma was a target of the government's COINTELPRO program, and that's stated in their own objectives of the program.
Who are you? You don't know. Don't tell me Negro, that's nothing. What were you before the white man mean you were Negro? And where were you? And what did you have? What was yours? What language did you speak then? What was your name? It couldn't have been Smith or Jones or Bunch or Powell. That wasn't your name. They don't have those kind of names where you and I came from. No, what was your name? Yes, sir. To kill the brother because he had began to take meaningful steps towards gaining the freedom for his people. He was taking steps to internationalize the black man's struggle and to take it to the United Nations.
This gives us an idea of what their intent was, what they were willing to do, what their political viewpoint was, and what ends and what unconstitutional and violent ends they were willing to adopt and use in order to reach their goal, which was to destroy progressive movements.
Today I want to say to the people of America and the nations of the world that we are not about to turn around. Yes, sir. We are on the move now. Yes, sir. Yes, we are on the move, and no wave of racism can stop us. Yes, sir. The burning of our churches will not deter us. The bombing of our homes will not dissuade us. Yes, sir. The beating and killing of our clergymen and young people will not divert us. Yes, sir. The ransom release of their known murderers will not discourage us. We're on the move now. Yes, sir.
Minneapolis police worked with FBI at RNC, Republican National Convention, in the Minneapolis Police FBI Joint Task Force that attacked many civilians, injuring dozens, if not more, arrests within the span of many hundreds of citizens, false arrests, and through a combination of racial prejudice, brutality, and general abuse of law and authority, Fourth Amendment, First Amendment rights. Corruptions within the Minneapolis police force have become so notorious that remark on them has now been all but commercialized. A veteran, former Minneapolis police officer of 20 plus years, Michael Quinn, at booksbyquinn.com, has published a very telling and poignant novel, Walking with the Devil, in describing the Minneapolis police force and the notoriety and the covert mechanisms under which they operate. Again, as seen here at the following URL.
Riveting, heart-pounding, in-depth, brutally frank and powerful. These are the words of countless reviews from literary critics, authors, and individuals after taking in the captivating words of 25-year veteran and author Mike Quinn from his book Walking with the Devil. Walking with the Devil details the ethics and dilemmas of modern-day police officers. It spells out the code of silence. This website presents excerpts from the book and a fascinating interview of Mike Quinn with Dan Olson of Minnesota Public Radio.
As reviews describe, Quinn walks a tightrope, describing concrete examples of cop corruption, abuse, and what's called creative report writing. While not naming names, identifying individual officers would have certainly brought charges of sensationalism, distracting from Quinn's hard-won and important insights. Another review, Quinn's brave. There are things you don't write about. Tested lying and breaking the code. Michael Quinn writes about both. And for the record, so do I. Minneapolis Police Department has a systemic history of these kind of abuses.
It's my face. Smells like at the hospital.
Then you can see Officer Mark Laness deliver a 1-2 punch that sends Brock tumbling and his hat flying.
He's like, you don't just hear a police officer down there. I'm like, what are you talking about? Then I just remember getting hit. That's it. I don't even remember anything else.
Is that appropriate force to use?
Very much so.
The law does not require police to write down the race of a driver during a traffic stop. But for 1 year, 65 communities volunteered to do that. The report shows in almost every community, minorities were stopped more than whites, minorities were searched more than whites, but minorities were less likely to have illegal drugs or weapons.
So what does it mean to have these findings in hand?
Well, what it should mean is that law enforcement across the state says, wait a second.
Tom Johnson wrote the report. He's a former Hennepin County attorney and head of the Council on Crime and Justice. But the state spent almost $2 million on the report, and Representative Ellison believes it deserves a hearing in the House. 2 years later, that still hasn't happened.
What was going on now is this sort of a big hush-hush on everything because we can't get the study or my bill the light of day.
Ellison's bill calls for the mandatory collection of race data on all drivers who get pulled over. He'll be pushing for it again this session. It's a policy supported by the Minnesota Supreme Court and a practice in 29 states.
Now it seems even black pastors are not immune from the racial profiling of bigoted Minneapolis police officers. Here you see a number of black pastors and clergymen meeting. And the captioned, pastor complained he was subject to racial profiling at a city park. Minneapolis Park Police Chief got an earful about racial profiling from members of the Twin Cities African American Clergy Friday, as depicted here. About a dozen black ministers sounded off on the issue in a meeting at a Minneapolis church. The meeting came a week after one pastor complained he was subjected to racial profiling at a city park. As appeared in Minnesota Public Radio, and as viewing Google's cache page of Minnesota publicradio.org /web/2006/07/28/profile it. Pastor Williams states that he was detained briefly by Park Police with assistance from the Minneapolis Police Department in an incident he claims had overtones of racial profiling. Racial profiling refers to using race as a factor in deciding whether to place someone under suspicion. In fact, reading through the article, you see the pastor was arbitrarily detained, and when questioning the police officer as to why, the police officer, failing to acknowledge, simply called for backup on his radio, and the pastor realized that should he not comply and pay false homage to this bigotry, that he may wind up being attacked by multiple police officers in an act of racist extremism. But mind you, this is no Rodney King. These are black pastors, pillars of society, and yet being treated like slaves.
We're not there to lose the fight, we're there to win the fight.
What I think a lot of times is that they're there to pick the fight.
Michelle Gross is with the watchdog group Citizens United Against Police Brutality.
I did not see a need to throw any punches, let alone the second punch.
Let's go! I want this area clear now!
He says it's part of a pattern her group documented downtown last summer, just a few days after Brock was hit. It's closing time in front of Karma, a popular club with African Americans. Officers on horseback push people down the sidewalk as officers with mace clear the street.
Now they're out here pepper spraying people en masse. I think it's very dangerous, and I also think it's provocative. We may have to get the hell out of here because I think they're about to come up on.
Color of Justice report completed by Council on Crime and Justice points out very evidently the disparity between racial persecution outside and within the judicial system. Evidence and anecdotes say whether it's Belmonte County in the north or Hennepin County in Metro, African Americans, American Indians, and other people of color are disproportionately represented in police stops, courtrooms, and jails. Minnesota leads the nation in the rate at which it imprisons non-whites. For every white person sent to prison in Minnesota, 21 people of color are imprisoned. A criminal justice system is a democracy functions only if the people believe it is fair. Racial bias or the perception of racial bias may be eroding confidence in the Minnesota justice system.
And as if to add even more leverage to their bullying, now Minneapolis State Judiciary has effectively made it a crime to report on police brutality. A quote-unquote false report being punished by a full 1 year's imprisonment. And despite the fact that there has been no successful reporting within Minneapolis for many years, as cases against police are always thrown out of court if they are even undertaken in any way whatsoever. A petition to overturn the Minnesota False Reporting Bill by Michelle Gross, Communities United Against Police Brutality, as seen in the link petitiononline.com/CUAPB02/petition.html. Reading from the petition as followed, it states, to Minneapolis State Legislature, during its 2005 session, the Minnesota Legislature passed a law making it a crime to, quote, falsely report police brutality. If found guilty, a person could be jailed for up to a year. This law is so vaguely worded that even journalists who report an incident that can't be later be proven could be subject to prosecution. The law does not specify who would decide if a police brutality report is false. Will it be the same police department the person is complaining about? This law is clearly meant to frighten people away from filing complaints against abusive police officers. This new law is a violation of the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment right of free speech and right to criticize a branch of the government and demand redress of grievances. We, the undersigned, demand that this law be overturned immediately and any prosecutions under this law be dropped. Sincerely, the undersigned. Click here to sign the petition. It would seem the Minneapolis Police Department has a fancy for KKK insignia and threatening messages related therein. Taking a look at this website, www.highbeam.com/doc/1G1-626-27575.html, we see City Council member gets racist letter, Sales Belton wants rigorous FBI probe. It's quite ironic since the FBI and the COINTELPRO operations are involved with the KKK, but nonetheless, reading further from the article. Article reads, Minneapolis City Council member Brian Herron received an anonymous threatening racist letter which he turned over to the FBI. This letter, printed on Minneapolis police stationery and signed KKK cops, arrived in the mail at Herron's office in City Hall on Tuesday with a Minneapolis postmark. Herron, who is black, declined to discuss the letter or disclose its contents. I did get a letter, he said. However, I don't want to make any comments about it. Again, as depicted at the URL as seen in the caption herein. KKK cops, Minneapolis.